Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film, and if it truly is a hell of a picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett, and I'm sitting across the internet, as I do each and every week, from the Apollo Creed to my Rocky Balboa, Mr. David Hollingshurst.
All right. I got Apollo.
Yeah. You got Apollo this week.
Good. I like that. Oh,
yeah,
man.
I didn't want to.
Carl Weathers, a tear from heaven.
R.I.P. I didn't want to give you Ivan Drago because I feel like you have a bit more personality than that, and we're not bitter rivals. We're maybe we started as rivals and we came together, and it's fitting, and it's very fitting for this week because we're doing Rocky IV. Arguably, could it be the best Rocky? I don't know. We'll discuss it today. Rocky IV, man. Whoo! Love Rocky IV.
Yeah, Rocky IV. I think we will discuss it. We'll have to discuss it. It would be odd if we danced around that subject. So no, we will confront that very directly. And I think a lot of people would say that it is kind of what comes to mind when you think about Rocky, which is an odd thing to say, given that there are, 9 films now, I guess, technically in this franchise, if you want to incorporate the Creeds in there.
That is, 9. That's wild to think about. 9 in the whole series. Yeah. I don't think we'll do all 9. Maybe we'll do another Rocky.
Not today,
at
anyway.
Some point. Certainly will not today. We got here from talking about Hero last week. Another hell of a picture for us, and some would say a propaganda film in its own. I would say a propaganda.
I think you can full stop. It is a propaganda film.
I was going to say, according to my older brother Bill, but no, it certainly is, and we discussed it a lot last week. If you haven't heard that episode, be sure to go back and listen to it. We're going to dive into Rocky IV in a moment. But curious, Dave, did you watch anything this week? Let the audience listen to see if we, if there was anything that sparked your interest.
Well, I did watch, and I'm not alone because it was in the top 10 on Netflix. The Quest, the Jean-Claude Van Damme film. It was a 96, I believe. Not just starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, but he wrote the story and he directed. Directorial JVCD. Terrible, as you could imagine, but a delight in that way. Thankfully, the season where I'm required to watch horror is now over. So that's good. We're past that. But now begins the season where I have to try to avoid Christmas films. So that'll go on until the middle of December. I don't believe Christmas starts until like December 15th. It's just me.
Yeah, you're wrong. You are wrong, sir.
Categorically
wrong. Halloween ends in this household, and we have to do everything we can to not put up Christmas decorations the first weekend after Halloween. I don't know if it's because we have the kids and you start talking about it, you get really excited and you start putting it up, and
sure,
and you start watching the Christmas movies. We start early and we get into it. But I watched this week. I watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy. That's sort of our yearly, fantastic. Not technically a Christmas movie. But we watch it around the holidays every year. Same with like the Harry Potters. Mm-hmm. We sort of go through them, and man, yes. Lord of the Rings. It was interesting. It was the first time that I sort of watched them, and I don't know if I was because I was watching them on Blu-ray, and I don't know what it was, but it was like sort of the first time they felt like they were aged in a bad way, but they just felt like older. Now it's been what? I don't know, 20 years since they've come out, 25 years or something.
I think the first one, The Fellowship came out when we were still in high school. Pretty sure I think we were grade 12 when Fellowship dropped. So going on over 20 years.
Yeah. So they felt like, these feel older, but they still hold up. And I love them. And, but I'm a sucker for Fellowship myself. Over.
Oh, I'm right there with you, buddy. That's best of the franchise.
too, like that shot where they're coming
It's
into the
got the most heart.
Shire. And, oh man,
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
it. Lord of
absolutely.
the Rings. But we are gonna, we're gonna pivot into another Christmas movie, Rocky Four, which I didn't even realize is kind of a Christmas movie, right?
Kind of, yeah. That's right. That's right.
It's like the fight takes
Yeah,
place on Christmas. I kind of forgot that in rewatching it this week. I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of a Christmas movie. Because
yeah.
it
I mean,
leads off,
it
yeah,
is. It's among those films, I guess, that people sort of. I don't know. It's not as lively a debate like Die Hard or anything like that, where
correct.
there's great contention on both sides of the aisle about whether it is or it isn't. Nobody really seems to discuss Rocky Four in that way, but yeah, I mean, you could make the case. It takes place at Christmas. There's some Christmas
Yeah.
imagery in there. Certainly some Christmas themes. Pummeling the commies. That's what Jesus would do. So American Jesus.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Rocky Balboa is coming to town. All right, so when we get into the deep dive of Rocky Four, we're going to start this week, as we do each and every discussion, with the rundown. Davis, can you give us a refresher on Rocky Four, as it's been some time since it did come out, and I'm sure some time since a lot of the people have watched it.
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if some of our listeners have Rocky Four in rotation on the
Ah,
reg.
that's right.
I know of at least a few people who do. So, but for the rest of us, after defeating Clubber Lang and regaining his title, Rocky Balboa appears to be at peace. He's heavyweight champion of the world. He's got a great family, loyal friends, and a robot for some reason. But his one-time rival and now best friend, Apollo Creed, seems ill-suited to retirement. Apollo is restless, and when he hears that the Soviet amateur champion Ivan Drago is coming to America, he sees a chance to get back in the limelight. Apollo and Drago agree to meet in an exhibition match, and though the match starts with pomp and jubilation, it quickly takes a turn for the beaten to death, as Drago pummels Apollo, with Rocky standing aghast in his corner. After burying his friend, Rocky has a reflection montage and decides to avenge Apollo by traveling to Russia and fighting Drago on Christmas Day, because, as we said, that's what Jesus would do. Now, after an unforgettable juxtaposition of training regimens, the two square off in front of a vociferous Moscow crowd and the Soviet high command. Over the course of the fight, Rocky battles back from certain defeat and wins not only the bout, but also the adulation of the commies. Rocky IV was written and directed by Sylvester "Sly" Stallone and released in 1985. It, of course, stars Sylvester Stallone as the titular Rocky Balboa, Dolph Lundgren as the towering Ivan Drago, the late great Carl Weathers as Apollo Creed, who I believe was the first man to go to the moon. We'll have to double check that. Bridget Nielsen as Drago's wife, Ludmila, and regrettably, Talia Shire and Burt Young as Adrian and Polly, respectively. Blah.
Oh.
Yeah, you're
No
already
love for
voicing
the
your
siblings.
no love, no love. Rocky IV had a budget of about $30 million and brought in a monstrous return of $300,1985. It was largely panned by critics upon its release, you might not be surprised to hear. Roger Ebert gave the film 2 out of 4 stars and said that the franchise was finally losing his legs. But there were defenders of the film. His counterpart, Gene Siskel, was more complimentary. He lauded the film for creating a credible villain worthy of its heroic lead and gave it a respectable 3 out of 4 stars. And though the critical response was mixed to chilly, we'll say, it has become very vogue in recent years to be rehabilitative towards this film. And odd as it may seem in a franchise that contains an actual Oscar winner, a Best Picture for the original, this installment is probably the most recognizable and iconic, likely due in no small part to Rocky's colossal adversary, played by the wickedly talented Dolph Lundgren. And the way the whole thing just drapes itself in the American flag is obviously very recognizable. A director's cut was released in 2021 that I was not aware of, and apparently it contains about 40 minutes of previously unreleased footage. Now, despite that, all the extra footage, it still comes in with a running time just 2 minutes longer than the theatrical release. So where did they trim the fat, you ask? Well, partly by expunging all memory of the robot. something which I'm sure we will get into later. And that is your rundown. So, yeah, man, a lot to process there for everyone for sure. Um, and if everyone will recall our discussion last week on Hero, and of course Andrew prefaced it in the intro, and if you've done the homework on Rocky 4, I think you'll see the connection that we're starting to make here right now. In addition to being stirring tales of pugilistic prowess, both of these films can be viewed as propaganda.
Oh, yeah, propaganda indeed. One for the Chinese national mentality, and obviously one for the American way, so to speak.
Right.
What's interesting, but what's interesting to me with the idea of the Rocky franchise versus, say, a film like Hero would be Rocky. Rocky is essentially building towards this over a kind of a whole franchise, versus a singular film. Right, we're with Rocky at this point for 4 films, and there doesn't really seem to be any sort of like indication of like national pride in the first 3 films. I mean, if anything, it's more associated with like a city. It's like very iconic with Philadelphia versus like this idea of being like American, but it's it's a version of the underdog story, which I'm sure we'll kind of go back to and talk about as we kind of continue this discussion. But it's an underdog story. It's not like a rah American story. And say what you will, the American story is not quite one of an. I mean, I guess you could say it's one of an underdog, but it's one that Americans love to pitch themselves in as underdogs. By the time this 4th movie came around, it was a clear American propaganda film, and it really reflected what was happening at the time, right? So there was a differed. So that's how they differed in their approach to the film, right? It was like relating a film's ideology to the culture at the time, versus Hero, which was creating historical context to their propaganda, right? So you're looking back versus like what's happening in the now.
Yeah, I mean, you need to consider where and when each of these movies are coming from, like you say, and I think any movie made in China is probably subject to some censorship reflecting the interests of the ruling party. And even though it's not close to the same level of control, because you can make an anti-authoritarian or anti-government film in America if you wanted to, but a film made in America during the 80s could be, and was, I'm sure, meaningfully influenced by the dominant cultural attitudes of the time and place. So with Hero, I think what you get is the expression of an empire that sees its greatest danger from within. And this is typical of repressive government. Whereas in Rocky and Rocky 4, the enemy is a rival empire. It's us and them. And I think that's more on brand with the democratic style of empire, and certainly on brand with the Cold War and the dueling of those 2 empires.
Yeah, I love that idea of the us versus them versus like the danger within idea, But, as I was saying, like Rocky 4, it is an underdog story, right? And if the film span, like, I mean, you were saying this in the rundown, there's 9 films, and they're all sort of based around this idea of the underdog. And sometimes he wins and sometimes he loses, but it's all about heart. And so like, how does heart, the underdog, how does that relate to propaganda? Like, what is that? How do those things relate, in your opinion?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to me that empires, and not just empires. You see this everywhere. You see it with sports teams. You'll see it with whomever. Everyone loves to frame themselves as underdogs, and even a global superpower like the United States or the Soviet Union. And that's for a few reasons. And maybe the most important of which, I think, is the value of moral superiority. And in something like the Cold War, a conflict without direct engagement, perception becomes a battleground. And even if we're dominant, most people don't want to see themselves that way. What we do is always more easily justified if we can frame ourselves as the oppressed, as the victim, or as just someone overcoming odds. But then there's this sort of competing part with that, because you can't be weak either. You don't want to frame yourself that way, because no one wants to see themselves
Mm.
in that light either. And so ultimately, what you get is this concept of the invincible underdog, which I think is really important. And that's what Rocky is. He's perpetually outmatched, and yet he's also undefeatable as a hero.
Yeah, it's got me thinking when you're talking about like the victim, and he sort of is playing a victim in this story, as Drago killed his best friends, but he has the choice to throw the towel. And he's like, but he's doing the underdog heart thing. It's like Apollo says, like, no matter what, don't, heart of a fighter, like never throw in the towel. And it's like, man, you could have saved your best friend's life. Maybe throw
Also,
in the
where's
towel.
where's the referee in all this? Isn't that the referee's responsibility to stop these things? I don't want to call too much
I
attention to
was
the inconsistencies of the film, but
I was questioning that too, but he does get pushed away at one point, and it's like Apollo can't go down because he's sort of against the ropes. But but
right.
it's like
So it's the
it is
wrestling sort
about
of trope where the referee gets knocked out. It's
it just gets thrown to the side. But you're right. It is about heart, and having heart it's synonymous with like the underdog story, right? They're the same, and I would go as far as to say like Rocky character, um, even more of the is kind of it's his inability to die, and this is what I sort of was just relating to. Like he can't give up. He can't throw in the towel, because then
yeah.
he's not, he doesn't have heart. He's not the champion that we all want. And that's not what a heart of a champion is, like, so as we see with the films, it doesn't really matter if he wins or loses. It's just, because he Rocky, he loses in the first film. He gets revenge in the second film. He loses again in the third film, but he gets revenge in the at the end of the third film, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about just coming back. And as long as you're doing it right and giving it all your heart, then you'll always come out on top, whether you're a good guy or sorry, whether you're like win or lose. It doesn't really matter. Now, in
Right.
contrast, again, like there's Drago, who, unlike Apollo and then Clubber in Rocky 3, the difference between them isn't sportsmanship versus heart, or fear, like not sportsmanship, showmanship, like in Rocky 1, right? It's like you have Apollo, who's this showman, who's just larger than life character, versus the heart of Rocky. Or in, say, Rocky 3, fear versus confidence. Or it's in this film, it's like man versus machine, or human versus robot, which is funny that there's like this
Yeah.
almost like comedic robot in there. But like it's again, it's sort of easy to compare heart and Drago being soulless, or i.e.
mm.
having no heart, just being like a robot, and therefore being un-American. Nothing says humbling hero than chopping wood and training on the backsides of mountains versus getting shot up with steroids and punching a machine. The funny thing about the steroids thing too, though, is is like we're never told that it's steroids. It's always like sort of, it's implied, obviously, but
Sure.
like
Yeah.
maybe he's just getting like blood work. I don't know. Maybe.
It's some kind of super vitamin serum. Yeah, it's. I'm sure it's all perfectly above board. The IOC would sign off on that, no problem. But yeah, I
Great.
mean, there is this long tradition in sort of imperial rhetoric, I guess, regarding indolence and advancement as kind of a fatal flaw of society. Like when you become too advanced,
Mm.
too cosmopolitan, too decadent, too far removed from your past, you lose your edge. The Romans did this, the Soviets, the Americans all do it with their political rhetoric. And so there's this tendency to frame the enemy in that way, and to frame ourselves as humble, salt of the earth, dogged kind of people, the soldier, the farmer, the working man. You hear
Yeah.
those invoked all the time by politicians who could not be further removed from them, which is interesting, about, and that's kind of the irony. that the people who create these myths or who use them really are the elite and the decadent of our societies. Like that the Politburo of the Soviet Union was eating caviar and drinking champagne while Comrade
Right.
Citizen lived on vodka and borscht, you know? And I, I actually think Drago is kind of closer to the reality of any empire, either the Soviets or the Americans. And Rocky is more of an imagined ideal for either of them. And because, I think despite how we frame ourselves, if you're a superpower, you are Drago. I mean, they're both Drago, really. Like neither one of them are
Right.
Rocky in any kind of real
Right.
way.
Right.
And all this talk of Cold War propaganda and perception makes me wonder what Ronald Reagan would have thought of this movie. He's a former actor, would have been the sitting president at the time. He's a great lover of folksy rhetoric, as we know. You'd think this would be right up his alley, wouldn't you?
Well, it's funny you should bring that up because there
Oh,
is a I think we both discovered this in our research about this film, is that there's this clip of Ronald Reagan talking about Rocky Four before he started giving this press conference. And you know what? I'm gonna play the clip, and let's
yeah.
just
Let
play it.
Ronald take it away.
Some of the greatest fight stuff I've ever seen filmed. So real. If you, from experience, I know how fight scenes are done, but good Lord, I can't help but think they were swallowing each other. Physical shape he's in. Good Lord, he must spend a lot of time in the gym. He looks like Mr. America with the muscles and everything. So did the guy they had playing the Russian part.
Thank you very much.
My fellow Americans, this has been a difficult week for the United States. I know we've all been deeply shaken by the tragedy of the Space Shuttle Challenger.
So Ronald Reagan, yeah, I think the funniest part of that whole clip is just the fact that it's like he's loving the Rocky Four. It's just he's just obsessing over the movie, and then it's just hard pivot to like the crashing or the explosion of the. It's just like, oh my god, what is happening? It's just
So
it's
great,
too
yeah.
funny.
Double R, man, double R, and yeah. Even for an analysis of a Rocky film, I think that might be a bit reductive. I think the movie is actually even smarter than Reagan really understands.
Yeah.
I think there is more to love here than just the defeat of the commies. I think we both agree that there's really a lot to love here.
Oh, I mean, this is why we're talking about the movie. There is a lot to love in this movie. And first of all, I mean, I just want to like, I started, I rewatched sort of all the Rockies before, 1, 2, 3, and then before I watched 4. And something that like the music in these films is just like next level.
Ugh.
It's incredible. And I think it's like, but Rocky 4, it's like at the peak of its powers. It's like, it's always been a part of the Rocky movies, like the like that Rocky theme from Rocky Run. You got Eye of the Tiger in the third one. But like Rocky 4 has just banger after banger. And yeah, I think, yeah, like you can't help but like just get like jazzed up listening to these tunes. Burning Heart, the Hearts on Fire, Living in America, just like banger after banger.
Oh man, I watched this movie Monday morning, and I went to the gym immediately afterward and had the soundtrack on repeat. Like I texted you, I was just like, oh my god, these like just every single one, and so good. Okay, like there's good ones on here that don't even make the movie. I'm pretty sure. The Sweetest Victory by the band Touch. That might be the best song on the album, and I had never even heard of it or Touch for that matter. If everyone can, I'd actually like you to pause and go and listen to the song, The Sweetest Victory by Touch, and we'll wait. Okay, I assume you've all listened to it, and like me, you're probably wondering, how is that not Journey? I actually had to look. I had to check it to be sure that was not Journey operating under some kind of nom de guerre or something, or that it wasn't like a side project for them. But no, it is Touch were their own thing. So full credit to Touch. And we can actually thank them in part for Michael Bolton, the frontman of Touch, produced Michael Bolton. So a lot of Michael Bolton's work. So great contribution to society, Touch. Here's to you. But cleaving to the matter at hand, what is so great about these songs, one of the things that I love about them, is that the lyrics are indistinguishable in some cases from the dialogue of the film and the events of the film. Like people are either just making really on the nose metaphors or really heavy handed literal statements of their feelings. It's the best.
Yeah. And I mean, when are they used the best in this film? It's like during the montages. In research for the film or research for the podcast, I read even in 2012, you talk about going to the gym after you saw this. Olympians, Michael Phelps and Ryan Locke, noted that the training sequences in Rocky IV inspired them to use a cabin similar to what was Balboa used in the film. And it's like the montage is where obviously all these songs are played. It's like, so, arguably the greatest Olympian of all time, Michael Phelps, was like used Rocky IV as inspiration. And that's
one of the great sort of sort of interrupt, but Lochte was the guy who pretended to be robbed in Rio. Remember that? He lost his gold medal, so he pretended to be, he was mugged. It was this whole like fraudulent. It was hysterical.
Lochte.
Anyway, yeah.
Ridiculous.
He doesn't have the heart of Rocky, I can tell you that.
But for the Rocky films, and when they use the music the best, obviously, are during the montages. And like a montage is not like something the Rocky films invented, but somehow, in American cinema, like montages have become almost like, it's just like a training montage is like, that's Rocky. Like that is what they does it in the first film, the second, the third, but in the fourth, it's like on like hyperdrive. I mean, there's like the first film I think has like maybe one or two, or it definitely has one, but maybe two montages, but it's not like this. The montage would be like of a fight or something, right? Like Rocky IV, like, I mean, there's just tons of montages, and the iconic climbing up the mountain and training with wood and like, but doing all the same movements that Drago's doing. There's, also the montage that they do it like where they're replaying all the Rocky, sort of everything that's happened in the Rocky movies before. Like I remember when I saw this movie, this was the first Rocky movie I saw. I didn't see Rocky 1, 2, or 3 because I saw this when I was like, I don't know, like at probably 12 or 13, and I never saw 1, 2, and 3 for a long time. I just like was like, because the montages, I was like, oh, he fought Apollo. There's that Apollo one where they're training, and there's like the Adrian scenes, and it's all part of the montage. And I have a theory that it's like it's about when this movie was made, which was 85, which was the sort of the rise of MTV. MTV had just in the early 80s had just sort of come on the scene, and music videos were like hugely popular, like massively popular. And they were like super cool. And people were like, that's how teenagers spend a lot of their time. Like, let's watch music videos, watch MTV. And it was like, let's just like bombard this movie with like cool, like of the time music and montages, and that's what'll get people super into it.
Yeah, I actually forgot about the driving montage where Rocky is reliving all his memories. I think that's the one you're describing. That like, it basically recounts like the whole series, and No Easy Way Out is playing, and man, he's just you just see like the reflection of like lights on his face through the windshield. And it's just this great like deep contemplative moment that Rocky has, and it's such a great device. You drive the narrative and you ramp up emotion in one efficient technique, and without that welling up of emotion, this whole thing doesn't work. Like preying on emotion is what propaganda and populist cinema is all about, and combining music with a fast sequence of inspiring images, that's the best way to do it. Like, it couldn't be better.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The montages and the music just it's what made. I want to say it's kind of the driving force and what made sort of the Rocky movies so popular. And even during the fight, the fight montages of the films, and like, when you're in sort of the, you're getting that montage, you get the first couple rounds of a fight, and then you're like, then it's like, well, we're not going to show rounds 3 through 14. It's like, it's going to be the same thing, right? You can't just keep showing over. So you have these like cool montages of like, the clock kicking down, the thing going up, them getting like in the corner, getting stitched up. When I saw this, I was not, I mean, I've been a wrestling fan my whole life, but I was not.
Damn right you are.
Damn right. I mean, look at the shirt. Hogan, WrestleMania 3, Thunder Lips from Rocky versus Andre the Giant. But I was never like hugely into boxing. Like, I was aware of it. And like sort of my introduction into boxing was the Rocky movies, and like specifically this movie. So I'm like watching this. I'm like, holy shit. Like, this is what boxing is. This is insane. It's like, they are throwing bombs. And it's like, you sort of realize that that's like maybe happened like once in the history of boxing. Maybe the Mickey Ward and, Ward and Gotti. The Ward and Gotti fights were like kind of like that. They were just like throwing bombs forever. Now there has been obviously more boxing fights. I said there was only that one, but there have been sort of ones that have sort of.
Nope, that's it. That's all that's happened.
But like the Rocky movies are just like, how are these guys fighting like this? This is insane. But if you have no actual reference to what an actual boxing fight looks like, then you'll be slightly misguided.
Well, yeah, real boxing would be a bit of a disappointment to you, I'm sure, because this is far beyond anything you are going to see in a ring most nights, and any one of the hundreds of haymakers that they land would be enough to kill a man. Quite seriously. And in fact, one almost did, because during filming at one point, Stallone told Lundgren to actually hit him for realism's sake. And so Dolph leans off and cracks him, and he hit him so freaking hard, Stallone's breastbone slammed up against his heart, which produced internal swelling, causing a blood pressure of 260. I think that's high. And Sly spent 9 days in the ICU as a result. So if you're looking for realism, look elsewhere. Part of the charm of this movie is that it's a bit silly, more than a little silly. I mean, Paulie's got a robot wife, for God's sakes. I mean, what the hell?
The robot wife, man. All right, it's time we broach.
I can't get past it. I can't get past it.
You can't. Now, I realized that there had to be a story behind this. So I in research again, I looked it up. Apparently, from what I read, and this is true. So Stallone has a son who is autistic, and he was getting I guess there was this it was like Robotics International, this company that like made robots, and he was sort of like around the same time was like talking to this company about like, I don't know if it was like getting a robot for his son, or like apparently these robots were like good with kids with autism, and like could communicate on a way better level with autistic children than like humans could. And it was like this robotics company that sort of focused on that. And he became so enamored, Sly, with this, and his son, like it like worked wonders with his son. And he was like so enamored with it. He was just like, I'm just going to write this robot into the film. and he kept like, apparently during production, he just kept writing scenes in like, like as they were filming, like this robot just became, so like they like had literally like multiple other scenes ended up on the cutting room floor. There was a scene with Paulie where he like rewires the robot, because like there's a scene where the robot comes in and has a woman's voice, and they're like an
Yeah,
odd
that's right.
couple in that scene, and he's just like gets frustrated with them, so he like goes in the back and he like fixes it and becomes this like woman, and it's just like, what is this thing? Anyway, he's just like Stallone like loved the company and loved this robot, and yeah, and it was like, so it had like really these really good intentions, even though it seems sort of out of place within the context of the film.
That's so funny. I'm just picturing now like a parody of the SNL skit, like the Chris Walken, I gotta have more cowbell. I'm just picturing Sly being like, I gotta have more robot, give me some more robot. Like, just can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
That's actually really sweet. Oh, thank you. It is. That's very touching, actually. And like, okay, the robot can stay, but it does make you wonder, like, why he was so glib about turfing it in the director's cut. Because, like, yeah, there's some quotes from him where he's like, the robot is gone. There's no more robot. Like, he seems to sort of understand that everybody, I guess, you're 40 years removed. It's probably, feelings have changed a little bit. So he's probably okay with it. But what he should have done was keep the robot and cut Polly and Adrian. Because, man, like, Adrian especially. Now, you watch the other Rockies leading into this. It's been a while for me. Does she spend the whole franchise doubting him? Like, this guy who always comes through, he always rises to the challenge. No matter how many times he gets knocked down, he gets back up. He defeats all comers. And she just constantly tells him, you can't do it, Rock. You can't win. I mean, like, what the hell? Come on, Adrian.
I think the first Rocky is like so loved because the film manages to mask a love story as a boxer's underdog journey. Like, that's what the film is, right? It's actually
Sure, yeah.
like, it's actually a like, I don't want to say romantic. It's not a comedy, but like, it's like a dramatic, like, romance film. It's a love story, right? That's really what it is, what it boils down to. And like, it's really about like someone who, like a down and out nobody that nobody gives a shit about, and someone who on the surface seems that they'll never find love because of like, she's like overly shy. Like, that's her problem. And she's just like, obviously would not seem to be the source of someone's affection. And it's like, it's a really touching story. And like, that's probably why it won Best Picture. It's a personal story. Whereas, and this, Rocky 4 is sort of changed from a personal story, or I guess the series in general, right? It's changed from this personal love story, this personal connection story, into like a full-fledged Hollywood blockbuster. Like, that's what this movie is. It's a blockbuster. And with the Adrian character, she slowly morphs into something she really isn't in the first film. And like, in the first film, if you sort of watch it in through the lens, you're like, oh, this person is just this like very, very overly shy person that's like awkward and weird. It's like, it is really kind of sweet, but like, she's vastly different from that than she is in Rocky 4. And I would argue, yeah, she's less interesting in Rocky 4. Whereas Rocky sort of remains relatively the same, like even down to like spending money, like he like, wins the fight in the first Rocky, or he gets like the money and he starts like spending money and he's like blowing his like all of his winnings, and he sort of like kind of does that throughout the series. He did that in like Rocky 3, and he kind of like didn't take Clubber like serious, and it's sort of like seen in Rocky 4 with, he's sort of this same character, like he's the underdog, but he's also kind of has these flaws. He doesn't change a whole lot, whereas Adrian is just like, yeah, she's kind of drastically different. And yeah, she's sort of this like, I'd say like more stereotypical sort of like love interest in Rocky 4 versus what she is in the first one. And characters can change and grow over series and time, but like, yeah, it seems like she doesn't, it feels almost like less authentic. And I mean, I guess that's why they killed her off in Rocky Balboa. Now, not to mention Rocky 5, because that was, Rocky 5 is awful, but yeah, they kill her off and she's just not around, and they were just like, yeah, we don't need to have Adrian in it anymore.
But then she comes back in Rocky 7, Adrian's Revenge. We all know that
That's
from,
right.
from The Simpsons.
That's
of
right.
course.
That's right.
That's what taught us Roman numerals. Okay, so that covers Adrian. But what about Polly? Because, like, he just seems to leech off of Rocky and provide nothing in return. He's not a trainer. He's not his lover. What is the point of Polly?
I actually really like the Polly character. He's a fucking scumbag.
Okay. Polly Stan, give it to me.
But he's a really sad character too. Like, he doesn't have any friends. He doesn't have any I think there's a really nice redeeming moment in Rocky 4, and it's like it was probably, besides Apollo Creed dying in his arms, it was probably the most touching moment in the film. Oh, even more so than like this speech he gives at the end is when he's walking to the ring and he says, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but he says something along the lines of like, if I could ever step out of my body and be anybody, it will be you. It's like, oh,
yeah, you're all hurt, Rock. You're all hurt.
Yeah, you're all hurt. Yeah. And it's like, man, that is like so sweet. But then, like, again, he doesn't really change a whole lot throughout the films. He's like kind of a piece of shit in the first one, and then he's just sort of like along for the ride. So, like, I don't know. I'm sort of okay with the Polly character. I mean, you obviously have a big beef with Polly, eh?
I don't know. I just think he kind of sucks, and like he's sort of this ingrate. Like, I mean, the dude, the start of the movie, it's his birthday. He's sitting there, like a total sack. Everybody's just, praising him and hey, they're doing so much for him, and he's just like, oh, I wanted a sports car. It's like, dude, like you're living in a mansion on the, off the back of. He's the fish that eats the food that the shark like leaves behind. It's like Banya and Jerry. He's just like he's the fish eating my laughs.
Yeah, that's right.
How a fish could eat laughs, but but yeah, I don't know. Polly, yes, he has that one little redeeming speech, but that's hardly enough to make as recompense for a franchise long life of sloth and ignorance. I don't know, man. What the hell?
Well, let's not forget that I feel like in Rocky 5 or Rocky Balboa, I can't remember which one. Doesn't Polly like lose all of his money or something?
I think so. I think he's some kind of financial boondoggle. Paul, I don't know. Polly gets taken in a Ponzi scheme or something predictably Polly. And yeah, Rock becomes destitute as a result. So yeah, to hell with Polly. He's a piece of crap.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happens. I can't recall, but in my opinion, Rocky 5 doesn't exist. But Rocky Balboa is the return to.
Is Polly in that one? Is Polly in that one, or is Polly void of Polly?
No, Polly is in that.
But you lose Adrian. Adrian though.
Dead.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very good. A fitting end to a deplorable character.
Amazing. All right. So, we've talked about our qualms. We've talked about what works in the film. What we haven't talked about is if this is a hell of a picture. So I'll throw it first to you. Rocky 4. Is it a hell of a picture?
So we talked last week about separating medium and message, and how we don't need to agree with a film to love it. And this is probably Western bias, but I think this is a less insidious piece of media than most things coming out of China. I think that's fair to say. But that being said, it still has fingerprints of empire and propaganda and American exceptionalism all over it. I mean, this is Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik. This is West versus East. It is us versus them. It plays our emotions like a fiddle. And God help me, I love it. There are a lot of different ways for a movie to be great. This is one very specific way that probably wouldn't work in most cases, but it does here. So, hell of a picture for me, Rocky 4.
Yeah, I think I was unaware, obviously, of the propaganda aspects of this film as kind of a 12 or 13-year-old kid.
Sure.
You have to get your older brother to kind of be like, well, just watch this with a grain of salt. It's not all rainbows and laser beams and American flags and fireworks. There's some
That's right.
troubling messaging in here. But with all that to be said, it's like, for me, this is a nostalgic film, and this is the peak of, I want to say, like, athletic prowess in a film. I mean, we didn't even talk about them. Sly is absolutely, and Drago are shredded in this film.
Yes.
I mean, he just gets progressively, and he's like, I mean, they're obviously both on copious amounts of steroids for this film. Like, the actors, like, they have to be like juiced up.
Yes.
I mean, they said Sly was training twice a day for, twice a day, 6 days a week for like months with Mr. Olympia for like this role, which would make sense. But like, it's like, whatever. He's an actor. It's like, he can do steroids to look good for a film if he wants to. So for me, it's
Mr. Olympia. I'm pretty sure of that too.
That's right.
Yeah. Certainly back then they were.
Yeah. Well, no, they certainly are now. But I think it's a nostalgic feel, and it's like, we talked a lot about the music, and I think this is like, again, peak powers of like training montages, and like somebody that loves the sport of boxing and loves that, style of filmmaking when it fits. It works for me. And I don't hate the other aspects, like the robot and the Pollys and the Adrians, as much as you. And that certainly didn't deter you from making it a hell of a picture. So for me, yeah, this is definitely a hell of a picture. Not all the Rockies are hell of a pictures, but Rocky IV and The Burning Heart, man, living in America, it's a hell of a picture.
So good.
Amazing.
So good.
So yeah, Rocky IV, another hell of a picture, man. We're on a run here. We're doing lots of hell of a pictures, and that's okay with me, because I like talking about good movies. And
absolutely,
not everything has to be a hell of a picture, but when it's a hell of a picture, it's a hell of a picture.
That's right. When it feels right, it feels right.
That's and this feels right. Okay, so next week, so again, we're gonna try to pivot to a film that logistically makes sense. We somehow find ways to connect films. I mean, we connected Rocky IV and
sometimes.
Eros. So do you want to tell everybody what we're going to be diving into next week on Hell of a Picture, Dave?
Yeah, so this will be a pretty logical one. So we're here. We're doing a boxing movie. We're in the ring, and we
Rocky
thought,
V.
Well, that's right.
Just that we were shitting all over it.
That's right. No, I think what we're going to do is we're going to go back a little ways to another boxing film, and this will open the door to an interesting avenue that we will walk as well. But we won't reveal the entirety of it right now, but we will reveal our first picture in an upcoming run, and that will be Raging Bull. You got Scorsese, you got De Niro, you got Pesci, and there's, well, I'll let your imagination run. There's a few places you can go from there, but we'll start with Raging Bull.
Yeah. I mean, we could tell people. We could just tell people the run that we're going to do.
You want to just tell people? Sure. And there's really no need for secrecy.
Yeah. So like Dave said, we're doing Raging Bull next, but we're doing the trio, Scorsese, De Niro, and Pesci. They did a run together spanning 40 years. Almost 40 years of making movies together. They made 4 films, and we're going to do all 4. And we're going to do Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Casino, and most recently, The Irishman. So you can buck up on your Scorsese's, and specifically, the Scorsese's featuring De Niro and Pacino, and Pesci. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this will be fun. I'm a huge fan of all these films, so we're gonna do a bit of a deep dive and see where we're at with these films. Have you seen all these movies? You haven't seen all of them.
I haven't. No, I mean I haven't seen Raging Bull. Or sorry, I've seen a bit of Raging Bull because I can picture a scene or two, but that might just be from allusions to it in pop culture or something like that, but haven't seen it in its entirety. Obviously, but Goodfellas and Casino I've seen for sure multiple times. But The Irishman, I hadn't gotten around to it. I always wanted to, but it just seemed like this it seemed like a lot of work. People were talking about how bloody long it was and how best to digest it. Like, there was suggestions on how to you could break it up into acts yourself and watch it in installments. Just never got around to it, but I'm excited for the prospect. It'll be really interesting to see how three people working together can evolve, and I guess also where do they remain consistent? Like what are their wants? What do they tend to lean into, and what are their strengths and maybe their flaws as a trio?
Yeah, I like sort of tackling this idea and sort of how not just a actor and a director, but two actors specifically work with one another, and then they work with the director, and how kind of these three work together to kind of create, I would say, timeless pieces of cinema with these four films. So I haven't watched Raging Bull in forever, and I have the Criterion, and it's just waiting to be watched. So I'm excited to watch that. I watch Goodfellas and Casino probably twice a year. Irishman I rewatched a little while ago, but I saw that opening day when it came out, and yeah, it is long, but it's but yeah, that'll be a fun discussion in a few weeks. But next week we're gonna start with the first one that the three of them worked on together, and that's Raging Bull. So that'll be a fun one, man. Raging Bull.
Mm-hmm. Looking forward to it.
From one boxing great to another film, Rocky.
It would be interesting if Stallone and De Niro actually stepped into the ring at some point. Maybe we could sort of speculate on who would win that. You have both, in their prime, of course. A young Bobby De Niro against a young Sly Stallone. And see who would come out on top.
Well, yeah. I mean, Sly is. If he's
pretty cut.
He isn't.
He's pretty cut. Yeah. But De Niro's got that hard face. He's got he does have sort of a stone face to him. He seems like he'd just be a tough dude. And maybe that's all acting. Maybe that's just a testament to the effectiveness of De Niro as an actor. But he seems like he would be, a tough customer. So
yeah, I think you're right.
Debatable.
So okay, so we got Raging Bull next week. We got another hell of a picture in the books, Rocky IV. So for David Hollingsworth, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and we'll see you guys all next week for another edition of Hell of a Picture.